Hello everybody, welcome to another Rick's Picks. Today I'm going to be doing a video about the differences between the original Gobots line and the original Transformers line. So what I'm going to be talking about is first we're going to talk about the toys, what's the difference between the two of them. And then after that we're going to talk about the two cartoons and see what's the difference between them. And then I'm going to give you my final thoughts on them. And yes, I'm just keeping to the 80s line. I'm not going to get into all the offshoots and stuff because that'd be a lot larger video. So without any further ado, roll that intro. So let's talk toys. So the two leading brands of transforming toys in the 80s was the Transformers and the Gobots. All right. Now a lot of people said the Gobots were the poor man's Transformers, but in a sense, both toy lines were a lot more similar than you would think. So let's start looking at the Gobots first. So they had both your small transforming robots and they also had the large transforming robots. Now, they decided to go more with the smaller figures for price reasons. And at the time, it made sense because a lot of your major toy lines were actually cheaper toy lines, such as G.I. Joe. Most of your G.I. Joe figures were about $1 something to $2. The same with your Star Wars figures. And a lot of your other action figures were around that cheaper price. So for them, it made sense. Okay, we were going to go with the cheaper price figures. All right. Now, just like the Transformers, they had the big ones and they had the small ones, and they had some good figures and they definitely had their bad figures, but overall it wasn't really a bad line. I had both lines of Transformers. Now I never had what they called the Super Gobots, which were the bigger ones. I had a bunch of the smaller ones, and the small ones were cool figures. I did like them a lot. Just like your Transformers over here. Now the Transformers also had the big and the small figures as well. But I feel like Hasbro was a little bit smarter with this, and just instead of just going all in with one size, they went with both sides. So now you have both sides of the aisle. You got cheaper figures, so if your kids can't afford the big expensive ones, you got your cheaper figures, and then you also had your bigger, more expensive ones. So you could do both with it. All right. And I also feel like the Transformers in this case got a better class of the bigger figures. Like when you look at the larger versions of the Transformers, such as Optimus Prime, Megatron, Starscream, and the rest of the cars and all, a lot of them look a lot better than the bigger versions of the GoBots. But the smaller figures pretty much look basically the same. Simple transformation. You flip them over, you can see the face, body, and all that underneath. So, when it comes to the smaller robots, I do feel like, they're pretty much equal there. It's when it comes into the larger robots that it seems like the GoBots started to fail. But also, an advantage the GoBots did have over the Transformers were their bases. So they had the command center, and then they also had, I believe this thing was called a Thundercracker, if I remember right, the Evo GoBots base. Now, these are actually transformable. So the command center had 3 modes. It had the base mode, the walker mode, similar to the AT-ATs in Star Wars. And then it had, I guess, like this vehicle mode here where it would ride on the ground. And the same with the Evo GoBots ship. It could be a giant robot. It could be a ship, and then it opens up to a command center. Now, what made this better than the Transformers was you could actually put your GoBots in it. In the 80s, you did not have any Transformer base that you could actually play with your Transformers in because the scale was all wrong. Like, yes, you did have Omega Supreme, which was a rocket base and so forth, but you couldn't put no Transformers in. You had Scorponok, same thing. What was that big white base? Fortress Maximus. All their bases, yeah, they look really cool. You may fit like maybe 1 or 2 Transformers of the small ones in car mode, but it wasn't really an interactive base where the GoBots bases were. Like back to the command center, because I had the command center. It was really cool. So it had flashing alarm lights. You had an elevator that went up and down. You had some, levels where certain things could do, like you could repair your vehicles, scan them. You had a little prison. Okay, yeah, it wasn't the best base command center of the 80s out of all the toy lines. I'm sure we can all think of like a dozen more that were better in other toy lines, but at least they had it. At least their figures could interact with these bases. So that would probably be the one big thing that I would have given the GoBots over to Transformers, is the factor that they did have two command bases that you can actually have your GoBots interact with, opposed to the Transformers. They did not have that. Now, they also both had combiner robots, except the Transformers, I feel like, had better looking ones. They were better style. Yeah, they had more pieces and stuff, but I think that's what made them better. The same with the larger Transformers figures. They were more detailed. They had more parts. You could do more with them, opposed to the larger versions of the GoBots, where there wasn't that much with them. Okay. And the Transformers kept on expanding, but because of the GoBots lacking sales, they didn't expand as well. Plus, the GoBots, another thing that they had over the Transformers was they actually had combiner suits for their GoBots. So you could get Leader One, Turbo and all that into these old combiner suits, and then they could all combine together, opposed to the Transformers that you couldn't. So the more and more you look at these lines from start until they started, tapering off, where the Transformers started growing and the GoBots started going down, you could definitely see a lot of similarities between the two toy lines. Now, the question is, what toy line was better? Was it the Transformers or the GoBots? Well, me as a kid, I played with both. I feel like both lines had their pros and cons. They had their really, really cool figures that look really neat, and they also had their flops. You know, so it was a combination there, and when you put the two together, man, it was a lot more fun. You had a lot more changing robots that you could do so much more with, and so forth. So I did like both toy lines, though. Like all kids, I started gravitating more towards the Transformers. And I think that had a lot more to do with the cartoons, which we're going to get into in a couple of minutes. Because I really feel like the toy lines weren't the main game changer. It was when you started watching the cartoons that I feel like really tipped it towards the Transformers. So that was my look at the toys. So next we're going to start looking at the actual cartoons. All right, so now we're going to talk about the two cartoon series from the 80s. All right, so both of them are very similar in a lot of ways. All right, it's almost like the Transformers were reading off of the GoBots playlist, script and everything, because they are so similar it isn't even funny. But the differences kind of make all the difference. So first off, the GoBots was the first cartoon out. They were the first one out of the gate. Now, just because you're first out of the gate doesn't mean that you're going to win the race. And as we're going to see, we're going to start seeing where the GoBots started falling behind in that race. So first off, you have your theme songs. Okay, so you have the Transformers theme song and the GoBots theme song. Now, unfortunately, I can't really play the two just because of the factor that, I'll probably get copyright striked if I do try to play both of these songs out all the way. But the Transformers one, it had a really catchy beat. The music sounded good. And it said the Transformers line, but it gave a slight description of the Transformers. It had that cool tagline, robots in disguise. And also, like I said, it told you a little bit about them. So you got Autobots waging war against the evil forces of the Decepticons. So it tells you, okay, these two factions are battling each other. All right. And so it was catchy. It had good visuals and so forth. Then you get to the GoBots one. The tune was kind of catchy. It did have a good melody to it. It did have some nice screenshots and stuff of them transforming in battle. But then the lyrics, you start losing me in the lyrics, because all the lyrics is the GoBots, dun, 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 dun. And that's all it is. So you don't know nothing about them. It just says the GoBots, and then you see a bunch of footage of them transforming and doing GoBot things. So you're already starting to lose people, because the Transformers is sucking them in, because it tells you a little bit about them and it's catchy, where this one is only just catchy. Now you get into it. So first off, you have their two planets. They both look very similar to each other, almost identical if you really look at it. But Transformers planet is called Cybertron. The Gobot planet is called Gobotatron. Let's be real, folks. Cybertron sounds a lot better than Gobotatron. You know, it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier opposed to Gobotatron. So you can kind of see the Gobots slowly drifting behind the Transformers due to how the Transformer writing goes and so forth, and the names. And you're going to find a lot more of that as you go along. So now both of them come to Earth, of course, because, you know, we need to have them on Earth. And they both come for different reasons. So the Transformers were locked into a never-ending war with each other on their planet of Cybertron, but they started depleting their energy sources, you know. So because they're depleting their energy sources, what they had to do was they had to go find a new energy source, and it just happened to be Earth. So, you know, in their search, they found Earth. So they go to Earth, they start plundering, you know, the energy from Earth. Well, the Decepticons do. And their war continues on planet Earth. Now, the Gobots, apparently Sidekill and his evil robots, you know, they kind of wanted to go to another planet, I guess, kind of sort of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Regroup and then start making their army bigger there, then come back. And the reason they chose Earth was because they found a corrupted person that is equally corrupt or something, and he was going to help them rebuild or whatever. You know, it makes sense, but I guess it doesn't make sense. You know, I don't know. To me, I wasn't too hip on that premise. I actually watched both Transformers and the GoBots recently to prep myself for this video to, you know, get me a little bit up to speed to them a little bit better. So that whole opening thing, you know, didn't feel as strong as the Transformers. The Transformers, once again, you can understand it. We're in battle. We need a new energy source. Boom, we're going to this planet. You know, and they found Earth by accident. They wanted a crash in there, where they don't really get into exactly how the evil robots from the GoBots, you know, actually found Earth. They just said that, hey, look, there's this crooked guy there. He might be an ally, and therefore, you know, we're going to go to this planet. So right there, I feel like, once again, the Transformers have a little bit of an edge. It makes a little bit more sense opposed to, you know, the evil GoBots leaving just for that purpose. Now, you also get into the names of the two factions. So the Transformers had the Autobots and the Transformers. Really catchy names. They both had their both logos. So the Autobots had the red face, the Decepticons had the purple one, and it looked neat. It looked cool marketing, and you can distinct who is who, you know, very easily. If you're buying the ones with the purple face, they're Decepticons. You buy the ones with the red face, they were the Autobots. So that made sense, and it worked. Now, the GoBots, on the other hand, you had the Guardians, and then you had the evil robots. But there was no insignia either. So you kind of didn't know which was which, unless if you read, obviously, the packaging. But, you know, so in a sense, that was bad, but it was good because then you could switch it up and you could pretend whoever was on whatever side if they weren't main characters of the cartoon. So that one, still puts a little bit more of an edge on the Transformers than the GoBots. But that is what it is. Now we get into the cartoon itself. All right. So the Transformers had the better looking graphics. You know, they had the better looking visuals. The GoBots, I believe it's Hanna-Barbera that was doing their artwork. They still had that older style cartoon, not as fine, not as detailed as the Transformers. But the thing the GoBots cartoon had that the Transformer cartoon didn't have was basically consistency. So Leader 1 was always a gray jet. Sidekill was always a blue and red motorcycle. Turbo was always a red car, and so forth. Now the GoBots, yeah, for the most part, they had their. I mean, I'm sorry, for the Transformers, for the most part, they did have their main colors, but sometimes you might see Optimus Prime as blue. Sometimes you might see two star screams in a scene opposed to one. Color variations that didn't go right, or you'll see a transformer in a room when you know they're somewhere else, and so forth. So there was a lot of inconsistencies with the Transformers cartoon, which they winded up fixing as it is. So that definitely goes to the GoBots. Even though they didn't have the better graphics, there is still a lot more consistent. Now the Transformers weapons made a lot more sense. So in the GoBots cartoon, instead of them having laser guns or anything, they just shot ray beams out of their hands, and those things seemed to work when the plot needed it. Transformers, they had all sorts of neat different gears. They all had their laser guns. Some of them have specialty lasers. Some have specialty weapons. They could do a whole lot of different things and what have you. So that's another plus that the Transformers had, was the factor that you could do more, with them in the cartoon. They could do a whole lot more different neat things. Now, I could go on about a lot of things, and I could keep on comparing, but these are some of the main keys. Now, the biggest key that I feel really worked in the Transformers' favor is personality. All right? The Transformers were given personality. Like the GoBots, the only one that really had any real personality to him was, to me personally, Wheelie. And the only real personality I got out of Wheelie was he was a coward. He was always scared to do everything. Like the first couple of episodes, he didn't want to do nothing. He was too scared, and they always seemed to force him out to do stuff. But that was the only real personality. None of these characters had like any real personality to them. They just had your generic, bland personality and what have you. The Transformers, on the other hand, everybody had personality. They had their own quirks to them, their own personality traits. Megatron was a brutal leader, who would do anything for conquest. Starscream was a traitorous coward who would look for every chance he can to undermine Megatron, and so forth. Soundwave was the loyal, subordinate. Optimus Prime, the moralistic leader of the Autobots, who would do everything and anything he could to save the lives of his Autobots and others. You have Helm, the one that can actually, loves Earth. He thinks it's great. He thinks it's beautiful. You also have Ironhide, dedicated war soldier, right-hand man to Optimus Prime, and so forth. You could just go down the list of all their different personalities. Jazz, he was kind of a hip, cool cat. And not only did you see them actually go to battle with the Decepticons, but you actually see them, on lack of a better term, their off time. You can actually see the Transformers playing basketball with their human counterparts, or having snow fights and stuff. And they make mistakes. Like there was one where Cliffjumper thought Mirage was working with the Decepticons. So they had a whole episode where Cliffjumper, and then of course he was proven wrong, obviously. And there's stuff like that goes back and forth. So there was a lot better writing and character development in the Transformers opposed to the GoBots. So that, to me, I feel like is the biggest advantage that the Transformers had, was the factor that each Transformer had personality. And then, well, we're not going to get into Transformers the movie versus the Rock Lords. I mean, that would be its own video in itself, how badly this one's better than that one. But for the most part, that's the basics of the cartoons and my thoughts on both cartoons. All right, so let's get into my final thoughts. Now, I know you see a lot of these videos comparing these two, and a lot of them get into like corporate mess ups, what this corporation did better, what that corporation did better than that. You could get, all the logistics and stuff. But me, I'm just comparing toys and cartoons, and what I personally, as a fan of both, thought what made the other one better than the other. And toy wise, you can go either way with that, because the toys were very much similar. Yes, you had some better Autobots in the larger scale, But you also had some really cool GoBots in the smaller scale, and they had fully functional bases. So, when it comes to the toys, you could be like about here with it, you know, because of the factor. Also, it seems like that the Hasbro people got a hold of some of the better, larger toys than the who was it that made Tonka, did with your GoBots. So you could pretty much go any way. You can even interact. If you intermixed them, you wouldn't really tell the difference. But I feel like both lines had their pros and cons, so it kind of evens out when it comes to the toys. For me personally, it's when you get into the cartoon that really, really shifts things. I mean, yes, the GoBots did have the better fluent cartoon animation. They didn't have all the flaws that the Transformers one did. Like, matter of fact, sometimes when I watch the Transformers today with my kids, I have fun trying to pick out the little flaws. Oh man, look, there's 2 Optimus Primes in that picture. Hey man, wasn't Ratchet white? Why is he purple in this one? Stuff like that. It's just fun to do. But I think what really put the Transformers over the top was storyline and character development. The storyline made more sense, and the naming too. Like I said, I just got into the plans like Gobotron versus Cybertron, but you got cooler names. Optimus Prime, Leader One, that ain't a bad name. Turbo isn't a bad name. Crane Brain, Coptor even that isn't that bad. I mean, the names, I guess I could go either way because the Transformers had some really cool names and they also had some lame names too. So you really couldn't get into the names, mainly in the plants. But the Transformers had personality. And that's what the cartoon gave them. They gave them personality, so much so that you really cared about these characters. So when something bad happens to one of them, like Transformers the movie, you generally cared about these characters when something happened to them. You actually had favorites because this personality is different than that personality. So it was writing and personality, for me personally, feel that that's what really put the Transformers over the top opposed to the GoBots. That their characters had personality and a lot better writing. And I feel like the stakes were a little bit higher too. Like with the GoBots, yes, the evil GoBots can go back and forth to Earth, but it was easy. They just whoop, all right, we're over there, whoop, we're back. We're in the Transformers universe, they had to make this special space bridge. And you kind of had to keep it a little bit secret from the Autobots so they don't find it. And, it had to be done a certain way, otherwise it worked. So there were stakes to it. It wasn't just this easy, all right, we're transforming into here from there. They put story and plot to it. So those are the reasons why I feel like the Transformers did better than the GoBots, other than all the corporate BS. So I hope you liked this video. Now, first thing I want to do is give a couple of shout outs to a bunch of people who support this channel. First on that list is Byron Bassett and his alter ego, Humongous. He does a lot for this channel. He's a big supporter of it. He does have his own YouTube channel and show that he does every Sunday. Go ahead and check out his information in the description. Next on that list is Action Figure Geeks. They're a Reddit channel that I'm part of. They are also big supporters of this channel. Their information is also in the description. And Joe Goddard. He's been a big supporter of this channel for some time now. He has just started his own YouTube channel, so go ahead and check that out as well. And most of all of you, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, watches these videos to the end, and so forth. Also becoming members. I really appreciate all of you. This channel would not be where it is today if you guys all didn't support. So I really appreciate all of you. And also, I want to ask you all to check out my Transformers playlist and also my membership program. Plus, hit that like, share, and subscribe. They're all small clicks for you, but it really helps this channel grow. So, until the next one, late.